Hello everyone, welcome back to Trek A Day. Today we have a bunch of topics to talk about. One point is that I feel like we are just about a year away from the end of the Kurtzman era of Star Trek. Week after week, as little bits of information kind of leak out about what's going on behind the scenes, it seems more and more likely that we are going to see the new Academy show and Strange New World Seasons 4 and 5 completely wrap up by the end of 2026, and Star Trek get a bit of a fresh start. And what leans towards that even more so is the recent news of the possibility of a fourth Kelvin Timeline movie finally being truly shelved, not really teased as maybe a possibility, maybe in a few years. It's done, and I think that I've talked about this in the last TrekChat video, why I think that's a good thing, and why I think we need Star Trek to do what it seems that it's going to be doing. Have a fresh start. Leave behind this Kelvin Timeline and Kurtzman era Star Trek. And that doesn't come from the perspective of someone who is a massive hater of this era and thinks that there's absolutely no good in it. It's been a very mixed bag. There's been a lot that's been downright terrible, but there has been some good in there. And I say that more so because I feel like as a whole, the franchise really needs to have a bit of a clean slate moving into this next era. It needs to be a show and movie. It needs to be a franchise that honors its legacy but doesn't rely on it heavily. I think we need to see, for this next era of Star Trek, a Star Trek Next Generation situation. Something, again, that really, I think, did that perfectly. That's why TNG really worked, that it was Star Trek for a new era and a new generation, and it had its ties to what came before it, but it wasn't wholly reliant upon it, and at the same time it still kept that spirit of the original series alive. It was still very true to that vision, to where I feel like today the real kind of core of what is Star Trek, even as someone who is a huge DS9 fan, is by far my favorite Star Trek series. I think when I think of Star Trek and the core of what does it mean to be something very Star Trek, I think of a mix of TOS and TNG and everything that came from those. I think those are kind of the core principles of what is Star Trek. And Star Trek needs to get a bit of a fresh start. And we have some news that a new Star Trek movie is in the works from John Francis Daley and Jonathan Goldstein. And it is going to be something that follows that pattern, something that is not immediately connected to anything that's come before, something wholly original. And I think that that is a great direction to go, and that could be sort of a launching point for whatever this next era of Star Trek is. And that leads me into one thing that seems like kind of an oddball exception, just because of the uniqueness of what it could be in its situation, and that is the possibility of this Star Trek United, this President Jonathan Archer series that Scott Bakula has been really pushing for, and why I think that could work, but only within a certain context, as it kind of goes against the grain of starting with a completely fresh slate. It's something that I think would work beautifully as a secondary show or a limited series, something that's not the real keystone or guiding main show of this next era, because it does come with a lot of baggage of being something that doesn't quite fit that mold that I've been talking about, and being more of kind of a political drama, the West Wing Star Trek, and it does come with the baggage of being tied to having previous knowledge, I think, to really get into it. It limits its audience a bit more, something a little bit more of a specific, smaller target audience. So it is a show that I would love to see, but I feel like it needs to be something that is not, again, more of something on the periphery, something for people who are really going to like that type of show. And what we really need to see for this next era of Star Trek is that kind of new TNG, a show that is lower budget per episode, more episodes, episodic, even with some story threads that kind of continue through, still go for that direction, but be something fresh and original. And I think that doesn't push out the concept of this legacy idea. If we ever get something like along those lines, where maybe one or two people in the main cast have some ties to being a legacy character, but it's mostly new people and new adventures. And when you do have something that ties it to, say, 90s Trek, it's something that is there because it makes sense within a story as a brief cameo of a character or something. It's not something that doesn't constantly feel like it's being tied down to what came before it, as long as it stays true to the type of storytelling that came before it with fresh original ideas and a majority, again, new cast. I think that's what we really need to see. And on the side, you could have something like this President Archer series, because by its nature, it could be something that you could tighten up the budget with this type of series being more of kind of a political drama, being a little less special effects heavy, and is a great example of something that can make reference to and utilize a lot of the storytelling of the novels, as we got a Romulan War and Founding of the Federation storyline for Enterprise within the novels. It can be tied to them without being tied down by them, and not actually just bringing them to screen in a way that, because we had the obvious passage of time, the actors are far older than they would need to be to see and have this kind of actual Romulan War type thing. We have this post-war, many years later, ties to a lot of that beautiful storytelling and still being original, and having just something very different for Star Trek with that as a sideshow, I think would be great, and has fantastic dramatic potential. You could really, just dealing with the early days of the Federation, all these different worlds coming together in the aftermath of the Romulan War, and it would be a fantastic opportunity to bring back a lot of the cast of Enterprise and give them a more fulfilling final chapter, as the show was again cut short with a horrible episode as its series finale, and a way of revisiting those characters in a way that also doesn't just kind of skip and dishonor again all the storytelling from the books over the years, the way even some of the better Star Trek of this past era has done, just kind of ignoring multiple decades of incredible storytelling. You can do it in a way that pays homage to those stories and gives us finally a really good look at these characters at a different point in their lives, and see a different point of the Federation in a show that doesn't quite have that kind of prequel feel, because it is so different and a real kind of politically driven drama. So I think the Archer series could work if done correctly, and again in the right time frame, where it's not just kind of standing on its own, because that's the kind of show that I don't think would attract a really, really wide audience. Isn't something that I think has a bit of a barrier to entry. So I think as long as it comes along, and there is also at the same time a real, again, just kind of core values and style of old school storytelling of Star Trek series out there, something that is this episodic, again, more episodes, lower budget, focus on what made Star Trek in the most traditional classical sense, not just a timeless classic series, but something that's endlessly rewatchable over the decades, and something that I think would be an idea that would have the best chance of balancing, attracting a wider audience as well as longtime fans. And I do see there being the potential for these things to actually kind of work out and happen. I think as it seems like behind the scenes, the next era is going to be very much a reaction to the era that we are winding down right now. I believe that's the direction we're going to go in, and I think that is the right way for the franchise to continue. And with that being said, this likely last kind of wave of Kurtzman era Trek that's coming out, I think for the large part is going to be very dead on arrival. That'll be sad if any of it turns out to be really good, because there's always that potential that maybe the Academy will be way better than it looks. Maybe Strange New Worlds seasons 4 or 5 will turn things around, and it will be incredible. but I think for the most part, a lot of it's going to go unnoticed. It really seems like things are going to be winding down. They're not going to be pushed as far. I think already those shows in particular have failed to truly garner a wide new audience. They have, of course, brought in some new fans into the franchise, but I think it's never been a large enough audience to make up for the segment of the audience that has been pushed away by them. And I think that's part of the problem, especially with the Academy, why I think it's kind of dead on arrival, is that I feel like even if it ends up being a fairly decent show, I think it's targeting an audience that really isn't there in wide numbers for Star Trek. I think targeting that Gen Z teen audience, I don't think that is truly there in the same way or in the same numbers as they are hoping for, especially for a show that has been purported to have an incredible budget, like per episode, just absolutely insane for the target audience it's going for and type of show. I just don't think that it has a wide enough audience for that, and I don't think that targeting that audience so specifically works in the time frame. It's something where if we're in the middle of a wildly successful kind of golden age for Star Trek, having a show that's targeting such a narrow demographic as its primary focus, that's a really large budget show, maybe that could work. But I think right now it's just not the right formula, whether it's good or bad. And if it turns out to be bad, that's even worse. But I think even if it was great, it's probably not something that's going to do very well. And again, I think the first couple of episodes, just the curiosity factor, like no matter what, I'm going to watch the first few episodes. I think those will probably pull in big numbers, but I don't think it's something that is going to do well. It's the kind of thing that, again, if it had been going for years during a big golden age of Star Trek, you could have so much merchandising tied to a show targeted towards the teen demographic, the people that, you know, the mall culture of the old days, like that's the demographic that has a lot of disposable income. That's targeted a lot because you're at that kind of age where a lot of people might have a part-time job, but you're not really old enough to have bills yet. There's why a lot of pop culture and a lot of commercialism has been focused forever on that demographic. I think this would have that potential, but I don't think it's going to happen. I don't think we're going to see a whole lot of really quality merchandising or anything, so I don't think it's going to go anywhere. And season 4 and the very brief now season 5 of Stranger Worlds, season 3, the reaction, there have been people, of course, who loved most of season 3, but I'm talking about the larger demographics overall. Season 3 pushed out a lot of people, even some people that enjoyed seasons 1 and 2. I think that the direction that season 3 took is going to hurt the potential audience for season 4 and 5. I think we're going to see much smaller numbers for those as well. And again, it's that sad situation where if they turn out to be amazing, it's just not going to reach enough people to appreciate it, I feel like. And I also worry that as they were originally supposed to have season 5 potentially a full season, that was like, no, we're gonna have a movie, and then it's like, no, we're just gonna have this really short season. I really worry that season 4 and 5 might have a rushed feel to them and an unsatisfactory conclusion to the show, but we'll see how it turns out, or if it ends up being just this kind of rush through season 4 and 5 as a backdoor pilot to the year 1 idea, which will likely and thankfully never come to fruition. So will it be a wasted opportunity, or will they somehow turn things around and make the show end on a high note? We will see. I'm curious. That alone has me wanting to watch those next 2 seasons, but I really feel like no matter what, 2026 is going to be a weird situation where there's going to be a lot of celebration of Star Trek with its 60th anniversary, but at the same time, I think that's going to be very much focused on more of a combination of the legacy content like 2005 and back, and looking at the potential future of Star Trek. And I think a lot of this current era will be, again, just kind of ignored in that celebration, swept under the rug. And I think that it will be an era that goes out with a bit of a whimper, sadly. I always hope, when we get these glimmers of hope and you get the occasional, like, really solid episode of Strange New Worlds or Lower Decks, or you get a kid show that actually, wow, works as a kid show for Star Trek, like Prodigy. You get these moments of genuine quality. Some of the stuff in the third season of Picard, like, you get these moments that are fantastic and give you hope, and then everything else is just kind of mixed bag or really lets you down. And I keep getting these brief glimpses of, like, wow, maybe we'll wrap this era up on a high note, and I don't know. So I think that there is a lot of potential in the future of the franchise. I'm really, really liking a lot of the stuff I'm hearing from behind the scenes, but I do think we are going to, at the end of this year and through next year, be at kind of an awkward spot, and think as a whole spending a lot more time kind of looking forward to what's coming next rather than taking the time to appreciate anything that is in the now. And I'd love to hear your thoughts below. That's it for today. Are you interested in the concept of this Archer series? Do you think it will work? Do you think it's a good move for Star Trek to really try and start with fresh, new ideas that maybe have connections to legacy content but aren't really wildly tied to it? They're not bound by it. Give a little more freedom and originality as long as it stays true to the type of storytelling that is very instantly identifiable as Star Trek. And will you be checking out the Starfleet Academy series or Stranger Worlds? Are you excited for them? And what do you think will happen with those shows? Do you think, as I do, that they'll probably just aren't going to get a ton of fanfare and it's not going to end on a real big high note? Or do you think maybe Academy will be a surprise hit and Strange New Worlds seasons 4 and 5 will really turn things around and end the series on a high note? And I always hope for the more positive outcome, but I always try and also look realistically at kind of where things are going, both from my own personal perspective and from the kind of broader audience reaction, kind of a combination of those to see where I think things actually will be. So that's it for this Trek Chat. We're going to kind of skip the TNG rewatch episodes for this volume just because I had so much to talk about in this one. It's a little bit longer than a lot of these tend to be, so next time we will get into a lot of those and a couple other things that I sort of left to the wayside to talk about for next time, including one thing about Strange New Worlds that has always bugged me. I mentioned this on the community page, but I've never really addressed it in any great detail. I have talked in my brief episode reactions and season wrap-ups about things that I have enjoyed about Stranger Worlds and things that I have not enjoyed, but there's one thing on the side of not enjoying that I don't think I've really touched upon, and it was a point that was brought up, and I realized I hadn't really touched upon it in any significant detail in a recent episode of the Decon Chamber podcast, where I was like, you know what? I've been thinking that all along, and I don't think I really talked about that. So that'll be the main thing we get into next time. And in the meantime, especially if you are a newer viewer, remember this channel has hundreds of videos. Any aspect of Star Trek that you can think of, if you're into retro media like VHS, Laserdisc, Betamax, check those out. Ship models, action figures, live long series going over my 100 favorite episodes of the entire franchise, favorite characters, anything you can think of. So scroll through the channel, look at some of those playlists, and I'm sure you'll find something that you'll enjoy.